right now, I'd like to introduce our guest, Pete Bloom. For over 40 years, he's the founder and principal zoologist at BBI, a consulting firm that he started. He's been working on long-term conservation efforts in California that whole time. He's an expert at trapping. He's caught 800 golden eagles and more than 35,000 other raptors, mostly nestlings. And it's all in a quest to conserve birds in the wild through field work and science. He's published on the biology of raptors in more than 40 peer-reviewed scientific papers and technical reports. And while working for the National Audubon Society as one of their staff scientists, Dr. Pete Bloom directed the field team effort to capture all of the remaining free-flying California condors in the 1980s. At that time, there were only 22 birds and very, very close to extinction. And by 1987, there were 0 in the wild because, of course, Pete was successful in saving the species. And I think that's a great way to end my intro and just say, as a wildlife biologist, having spent 25 years working to recover the species, I owe you a debt of gratitude. And more than that, we all owe you a debt of gratitude because this species is here today. And if they weren't all brought in at that time, we surely would have lost them. So welcome, Pete. Thank you so much for being here today.
Kelly, thank you for that introduction. Very kind. My pleasure. Where do we start?
Well, I've got some questions prepared, but I want you to stay relaxed. You know, I'm not a professional interviewer here.
Perfect.
We're just talking amongst friends, and never mind, there's 220 of us out there listening in.
Understood.
So let me just jump right in. You're one of the premier consulting biologists in the state of California. Let's just start there. Why don't you tell us more about you and the work that you do and your firm at BBI and whatever else you'd like to share.
Okay. So I suppose like lots of young boys who collected bugs and lizards and snakes, I didn't stop. And in fact, for me, growing up into my adolescence, every weekend was a chance to go capture something new. And I literally hiked all over Orange County and surrounding areas, and whenever my folks went out to new areas, I went with them and caught things. And I wound up on the Condor program largely because at the age of 18, I applied for a banding license and particularly focused on birds of prey. I knew I was really interested in animal movements. And at that time, there weren't too many animals you could mark as individuals except birds. They had a nice leg that took a band real well. And I wanted to look at individuals and see how long they lived and where they went and who they mated with and all that stuff. And I was really fortunate to be able to get that permit. A professor at Cal State Long Beach, Charles Collins, took me under his wing, and I was off capturing raptors. That experience capturing raptors and banding some young golden eagles and other large species actually enabled me to get my first job within the Condor program, and that was capturing condors. So that was a very political time early on in the Condor program. In 1980, we accidentally lost a chick, and it set us back. Set the whole program back. Politically set us back. It didn't have to set us back, but it did. People in the state were very unhappy with the feds, and they took it out on the feds by taking it out on the Condor. So it set us back for basically 2 years of no trapping. And I wasn't on the program at that time, 1980. I got on in 1982, May of 82, and was there till May of 87 when we captured the last bird. But from there, I had finished my bachelor's degree just before taking the job here with Audubon Society. And I had to finish my master's degree when I left the Condor program briefly. Not left it, but basically took a tour of duty while Dave Clendenin caught the two of the birds toward the end there, and then I helped to capture the last one. But let me say my life has been I'm a slow learner. 10 years to get my bachelor's, 10 years to get my master's, 10 years just working as a consulting biologist, getting experience, and another 10 years to get my Ph.D. at the tender age of 60. So that's me. I work on a wide variety of species, from arroyo toads to Pacific pocket mice. I really like working with red-tailed hawks and other common raptors. As we all know, common animals often don't stay that way. And there's much to be learned from those species, and that I'm very focused on natal dispersal, breeding dispersal, and movements in my research and conservation.
That's fantastic. And those are the key, the kind of the vital statistics, if you will, from a conservation biology standpoint, right? You have to know how they're doing reproductively. You need to know where they're going and where the threats are and so forth. So the work that you do is really foundational in many ways as far as conservation of birds and other animals in the state of California.
I'll say this too. It's I was always sort of surprised in the sense that I didn't get into serious biology because I was a particularly sharp or smart individual academically. I got in because I could offer some technical skills that other people didn't have at my level. And I want to say that to all you young academics out there, want to be biologists, that you do not have to have a 4.0 to obtain a PhD and do good stuff. In fact, you don't even need the PhD. Just get that bachelor's and work hard. Do your own research.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And getting out there and volunteering and getting involved in programs like this are often a good way to get a leg up and get some good experience.
Your location there, Kelly, is perfect for young people to get started.
Yeah, I think of it as a little incubator. We've got people in all programs now. It's great. I love it.
I would also add, the best volunteers that I have come on board are retired people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, you already answered my second question, which is how you got involved in the Condors in the 1980s. But this next question is really more about, I guess, how you were feeling. And, this was an extinction crisis. I mean, we still are in an extinction crisis, granted, but for this species, even more so, down to the last 22 individuals, you must have had some doubts about this species being able to make a comeback. Just tell me more about what you were thinking, when you caught that last condor and what was going on in your head at that time.
So you're right, Kelly. They were very difficult times. I'm sure anybody on the program at that time was sweating bullets, so to speak. And it wasn't just that the species was down to 22. The politics were horrid. And then we had that bad start. We lost one of two chicks that were handled that day. And the opposition to captive breeding, to radio telemetry, to trapping, they came out gangbusters, really wanted to snuff the program. And so when we finally did get permission to start capturing birds, and at least for me as the guy directing the effort to capture, there was no room for condor mortality. There was no room. And it would have meant, I'm serious when I say this, it could have meant the end of the condor, because surely the people that said it couldn't be done would have won. And I don't know that we would have roughly 500 birds in the world today with that. It was that close.
Yeah.
And so every day we went trapping, I thought of that. And I'm sure many of the others on the team did too. And I have to say that when I came on in 1982, I didn't know anybody. I was extremely impressed by both directors, Noel Snyder and John Ogden. It was a privilege to work for both of them. But the people, all of them, every field person was such a dedicated individual. And I was just stunned when these guys put on this 50, 60-pound backpack and headed off for Agua Blanca. And I'm walking behind these guys and I'm thinking, do these guys do this each week? Do I have to do this? And I was just stunned. These were really dedicated people and no one was out there applauding them or anything. But I have to say that the leading the trapping effort was certainly the height of my life. And I can't thank all the rest of the team members for all the help they provided because we all did it right. Remember when a cannon, you people don't use cannon nets, I don't think. Those were 4 mortars, deadly mortars, using a number 8 blasting cap to lob 4, I think there were 3-pound mortars, steel mortars that could go a quarter mile if they became detached, or could kill a California condor or a human being. So every morning we would test fire. Not every morning, but many of these mornings we test fire just to make certain the net was deployed right, the cannons were straight, and that the electricity was working. And we did that 90% of the time. Every so often we'd skip because we thought everything was pretty good. But it was because of the cannon net, actually, in my thought that as the program progressed, that some of these birds were becoming wise to being cannon netted. And I imagined condors from 30,000 feet, so to speak, and looking down on the ground, and there's that postage stamp again with a calf in the center of it, that funny little black and white calf, and those 4 little bushes. And I started thinking, maybe we're not catching these things because they're catching on. They're learning.
They're smart.
And at some level, I think they did. And that's why I thought, let's try something a little different, not unproven or untried, but the pit trap, which was very prominently spoken about by someone who wrote on the Hidatsa Indians in eagle trapping on the Missouri Breaks. And that was my first real handle on, hey, these guys, these people did this early on very successfully with eagles. Now, what do we have to do to adapt so that a human being can be there 12 hours a day, days on end? And that was to develop a pit trap that would be about 3.5, 4 feet deep, 3.5 feet wide, and about 6 feet long, very grave-like. Put a roof over the top that was 3/4-inch plywood with 2 4x4s so that nobody could drive over it, no cows or horses could fall through it, and you could be reasonably comfortable. And that was a wonderful technique. We caught, between Dave Clendenin and myself, we caught 5 California condors using the pit trap. It was extremely successful. I'll recount how frustrating it could be and how politics can interfere with conservation, though. There were times when we could not trap condors because of lawsuits between Audubon and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then there was the Native Americans who sued, I think, Fish and Wildlife. But there were months of downtime. During those months of downtime, I was real interested in lead poisoning and golden eagles because I had this surrogate species by the bundles. Sometimes we'd have 14 eagles waiting around that calf carcass, and I'd be in my little pit trap. And but what would happen, Kelly, is I would have condors walk right by me that could have been grabbed, not without any issue with safety, such as four cannons might provide. They could have been grabbed easily. I had to let them walk by. Many of these birds would have been caught months earlier had somebody not interfered with the trapping effort. Some of those birds that died, some of those 6, they died because I couldn't grab them. They were within 6 inches of my hands. So it was at times frustrating, but the good news is everybody eventually got the message and was on playing the same tune, and the punchline is that the project is, well, what a success. But imagine what we could have done with the other potential genetic variability had politics not interfered.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. And I'm glad you brought that up because, I don't know how close you are to the modern day program, the current people in the field, the Pinnacles folks and U.S. Fish and Wildlife folks out of Hopper Mountain and us here in California. And of course, you've got Peregrine Fund out in Arizona and the Baja crew down in Mexico. We all, believe it or not, Pete, we actually all share our data in one database. Could you imagine, something like that back then?
Yeah.
So yeah, the level of cooperation now and collaboration is just outstanding. And we're really proud to be a part of that and to have been, I think, instrumental in some of that as well. So glad you brought that up.
It should be.
But yeah, just going back to that time and, the Extinction Crisis descriptor that I gave, that must have just been a tremendous amount of pressure, and, lawyers, they have a lot of stress when they go to work, but I mean, you don't think of field biologists as having stressful jobs, but I mean, we had a whole species, hanging in the balance, and then to make matters worse, your hands were even tied at times. So, wow, thank you for sharing that.
Sure,
that's just amazing.
We were all in a hurry. We biologists knew what needed to be done, and every day one of these earthquakes, or every year there'd be a couple of these earthquakes that would set us back. It was just unconscionable, and again, it was just total politics. It wasn't the biologists. I mean, you often hear about the infighting, and there was some of that, but that was the small potatoes stuff. The big stuff was what the California commissioner, or excuse me, the chairman of the Department of Fish and Game prevented us from doing.
Well, thankfully, though, and I hope you agree, what was saved in terms of genetic diversity has so far, knock on wood, seems to be pretty good. We have the master planning sessions, and we make sure that we're mixing up the pairs as best as we can, that every genetic founding line is represented at least 5 times before any of those additional chicks go out in the wild and so forth. So, I mean, even though it got real close, it seems like enough genetic diversity was saved, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember the still being on the program and hearing the report from the geneticist. I can't remember her or his name at this moment, but I remember how, I think it was a woman, but she concluded that we had captured enough of the genetic variability that it was likely that this would not be an inbreeding issue for the species if we very carefully paired birds. And of course, the zoos did do that. I mean, and now you people. So amazing stuff.
And as we fast forward, we look at the proof in the population, and we're not seeing anything that we should be concerned about genetically. So I think we can check that box as far as not being a limiting factor. And of course, this crowd out of any crowd knows very well what the limiting factor is, and you've already mentioned it, and that's lead from spent ammunition. And we're really, really hard at addressing that issue. It's frustrating at times because similar to what you dealt with in politics, now we're dealing with market changes, and when the market has plenty of copper ammunition on the shelves, it seems like condor mortality goes down, and when there's nothing on the shelf, mortality starts going up again, and so that's what we're dealing with. But even still, we think of, say, the waterfowl conversion of lead to non-lead for waterfowl hunting in the 90s. At the time, it was also incredibly controversial, and there was a lot of fighting over it. But you look back now, and you ask a waterfowl hunter, about the issue. Oh yeah, of course we use non-lead. It's really a done deal. And you fast forward in rifle ammunition, let's imagine the same holds true. I mean, we're looking at a self-sustaining population of condors, aren't we?
Yes, yes. Here's something that I'd like to point out. I think it's remarkable that we who are talking and are on this screen today have California condors to look at all, given how much lead was spread around the environment before 1980, when the official condor research program got underway. Remember from the work that Hank Petit and I did and others at the Condor Research Center, we blood sampled 168 golden eagles. 1/3 of those golden eagles, and remember guys, golden eagles are predominantly a predator. They're not an obligate scavenger. So, probably at least 50% of what they eat is things they kill. That should offset lead some. And because 50% or less of what they eat is carrion, 1/3 of those birds were exposed to environmental lead out of 168 predators, not technically scavengers, not obligates. So it is amazing that we even had the birds to bring back. We're lucky they lasted as long as they did, but we were right there. They and we were right there at the end.
They're really tough birds, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've really gone through so much. It's amazing that they are still here today.
My fear with the lead issue of the future is that, just like at my home with my family, my dad died 30 years ago. He was a young man. He was an avid hunter. Well, for the next 4 decades, I looked at hundreds of cartridges of 30-30s, 30-06. Those are all lead. And there's a lot of those cartridges in the closets of a lot of homes surrounding the Central Valley for people who are avid hunters. I hope they use them for target practice and not on animals.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you brought that up, because right before COVID, we were offering an exchange as part of our free giveaway program of copper ammunition. And a lot of people were taking us up on it. And we were giving the lead ammunition to Boy Scouts of America and looking toward other groups like that are, going to teach the next generation about shooting sports responsibly. So
great idea.
Was a good win-win, get the lead out of the environment.
Yeah.
People seem to really like it, but COVID has put a dampener on that temporarily. Sure. But hey, I think we're running out of time. So let me just get any final thoughts that you have. How, did you think back then when you caught that last condor that we would be at this point today? Do you think
I was
on the right track? What do you think?
All through the program, I was waffling as to whether we were doing the right thing. Not that I wasn't focused on capturing every bird I could with every ounce of strength I had and so on, and the rest of us. But whether it was work was never always a given. It seemed like it should, though, and it was the best bet. So we all stuck with it. And at the level the condor is today is unimaginable to me. The number of birds, and as you say, the positive cooperation and interaction between a half a dozen, 10 major groups of agencies and private organizations is just an amazing coming together of positive attitude that has brought us to 500 California condors or wherever we are. I know we're really close to that number. I'm going to use 500. Yeah. But I'm stunned. I was at Zion National Park about 3 years ago and witnessed, I think, what was the first California condor chick from Zion National Park. Yeah. What a moment that was. I mean, I never would have guessed condors would have been back. I didn't even imagine them being in any other state but California. I used to say, forget Arizona. California's never going to let Arizona have California condors, because it was that sort of political football, and you never knew what was going to happen. But there's no question. It is just a wonderful, positive experience in conservation biology. It is one of the best in the world. Great bird.
Well, that's a great place to stop and open up the rest of our time to questions. I know we got some before we even started the chat, and then I know we've also collected some since. And Mike Stake, are you still with us? Mike's so good at fielding questions.
Well, a lot of reaction. Someone says, Pete, deep thanks for your work with condor recovery and all your conservation work throughout the years. And thanks for being with us today. A lot of people are commenting about all of the pressure that you must have been on and must have had, and you've expressed some of that here today. How did, pressure to not harm the condor, pressure to get it right, maybe lingering doubts as to the whole thing that you're doing, all of these things that you've mentioned. How do you take on that pressure, and how does that manifest in the whole process while you're waiting? I think people would like to hear some details on what it was like. Were you in that blind alone? Were you in the pit alone? How long did it take before, let's say, the last condor, when you caught that one? How long did you have to wait? What did it smell like? How are you dealing with all of the emotions going through your head? Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Thank you for that question. That's a big one. The first condors that were captured using the cannon net with basically 4 distinguished gentlemen in a very cramped 4x8 blind. All of us children in one way or another, hoping to catch a condor, and then actually occasionally doing it. But the days in those blinds were week after week after week of basically 5 to 7 days a week, and skipping holidays and vacations and just coming. If the birds were there, we were out there. And what was hard to take is sometimes condors would fly over us, and you'd hear from the radio, maybe Jan Hamber or Jesse or someone else off on the hillside telling us bird overhead or 3 birds coming in, and then they come in and they keep going. And you don't know whether they're coming back today or tomorrow. The experience in the pit trap to me was second to none. And every biologist who has an opportunity to be in a pit trap, even if you only use it as a blind, should try it. It was the most exciting place on earth as far as I'm concerned. I spent days and days and weeks in the pit all by myself with we didn't have computers, so I had a briefcase with a lot of reading material and a dead calf or a dead deer in front of the pit. And all day long, think of it, all day long, the entertainment is ravens, golden eagles, every now and then a California condor coming in, like once a month. But there was no more exciting a place on earth than to have a half a dozen golden eagles within 3 feet of you fighting over your carcass, and maybe a few ravens standing on the side. The first time I ever caught a California condor in a pit, there were 5 California condors feeding in front of me on this carcass, and a half a dozen golden eagles on the side. And I call that slot that I used to grab condors through, that was the Pleistocene window. It was a spot where if you closed your eyes a little bit, all you saw were native golden eagles, native California condors, a bunch of ravens, a landscape that hadn't changed in thousands of years, a bunch of blue oaks, maybe a valley oak here and there, a horizon that hadn't changed, and punch in a dead ground sloth. Change that bloody mess of a cow, make it into a ground sloth, and you had a setting that was Pleistocene in its architecture. So I have to tell you, as boring as it could be in the pit, and it was, and it could be hotter than hell in the pit, and it could be colder than snot in the pit because there was snow on your roof or the sun was beating down on you. There's no better place to be, guys, gals. If you're a biologist, dig a pit someday, throw a carcass out, and just watch what comes in. And I did this in India once too. It's different there.
Hey, before you get to your next question, I just want to share one quick story. When we first did our release of Condors in Big Sur in 1997, the first 4 birds needed some work behaviorally, and long story short, they were all recaptured and brought into captivity, and we changed our strategies, and ever since then it's worked really well. But one of those birds was nearly impossible to capture. We tried everything, and finally we said, well, there's always the pit trap. But this was the Big Sur coast where it was so rocky, and you couldn't, we got nothing more than a shallow grave. Right. And it was like, no, I don't think this is going to work. But I want to give big kudos to Joe Burnett, who's not here today, because he tried it. And he laid there in a shallow grave on the side of Highway 1 with a carcass laying on top of him, trying to do what you did. And, it just was destined to fail because of the terrain, I think. But you'll have to ask him about that when you see it.
It could have worked, but I grant you it would have been difficult, because that's exactly how the Native Americans, the Hidatsa Indian tribe, used a deer lung. They would make a shallow grave, 12 inches deep. Somebody would put sticks on top of their chest. They'd put a deer lung on top of that chest, and they were on their back. I was on my knees, and wow. I could move around. They were on their back for 4 hours or 8 hours.
Well,
and then they grabbed it.
Joe gave it a shot. I think he tried it for at least 2 or 3 days or something like that. Had a close call, almost got him. I mean, it was exciting.
That could work. It could work, but it does take a really strong bladder.
All right. Anyway, sorry. Let's get to the next question.
Thank you for that.
Lawrence says your description of the last condor being trapped is the best story and presentation ever. Kitty wants to know when the movie is going to come out. Others have asked if you've considered writing a memoir about your experiences. I'm sure you have plenty of time to whip that out.
Regarding the memoir, I wish I could. I don't think that will happen. I am hopeful that I'll have the time to write a book on basically all of my natural history experiences growing up in Southern California as a biologist, and including the Condor program and other stuff. So I've got this dream that might happen. I think it might keep some young people hopeful about doing something similar to what we do. So I'm hopeful.
You mentioned a little bit of work in India, and many of our members and viewers are looking forward to celebrating International Vulture Awareness Day with us later in the fall. Curious if you've had any experience working with vultures around the world. Are there any vulture conservation issues close to your heart?
Yes, I did have some experience. I was asked to volunteer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's International Affairs Office after leaving the Condor program for several years. And it was the goal was to expose Indian raptor biologists with all the different traps that one might use for capturing birds of prey. And we did capture a couple of Egyptian vultures and 2 Indian whiteback vultures. This was all just before the population plummeted. I mean, I think it was 1997 was the last year I was there. I would go for a month each year for 6 years, teaching trapping and radio telemetry techniques, etc. So I've had a little experience, but not too much. Really, a lot here in North America with turkey vultures and, of course, condors. We've got about 400 turkey vultures with patagial tags out there that we hope that every now and then you people report for us. So this is good. And by the way, if you're listening, they have a white tag. Usually there's 2 numbers or a letter and a number, almost always on the right wing. We would appreciate any reports.
Great.
Well, there is one individual out there who was very sorry that he couldn't actually attend this webinar, but will watch it, the recording of it. And this person actually wanted me to ask about turkey vultures. This is someone who works at Palomar Mountain and has had occasion to see banded or tagged turkey vultures. Have you been involved in that work? And what is the status of turkey vulture tagging to date?
The Western status is that, well, I'll start by answering this person's observation. We have seen her reports to the bird banding laboratory, and I think she's seen one of our vultures marked in Orange County at Mount Palomar on her antenna. I think I remember corresponding to her like twice, like 2 years in a row. That might be a migrant. Most of the birds that we tag are right here on the coast, within 15 miles of the coast here in Anaheim. And the majority of those birds are seen between the Mexican border and Ventura. And then occasionally there are migrants. If I go further east into the desert, those are almost all migrants. And tags, not very many, are observed or recovered in Mexico. So we have other sort of interesting tidbits. Is our oldest bird is 21, still kicking. That bird moves between the Prado Dam above on the Santa Ana River and Bolsa Chica, which is a state wildlife preserve. And that bird is probably seen like 3 times a month and reported. So it's got like 170 observations behind it already in the 21 years it's been kicking around. So as far as we have 40, we've marked about 400 over 20 years. And there are some marked up in Washington on the coast. And recently Golden Gate Raptor Observatory has started marking a half a dozen, 10, not too many, I don't think, but because I keep getting a lot of the reports. So as far as coastally, there's Washington on the coast. There is Golden Gate Raptor Observatory, and then we mark the majority here in Southern California. And as you might guess, we're looking at lead, not just movements, but lead. And most of our birds are not radio tagged, they're just potentially tagged, kind of a poor man's way of getting information on animal movements.
I like these fancy condors carrying around GPS, you mean?
I wish we had a few vultures doing that, but not yet.
Well, I know she'll appreciate that answer, and
yeah, we really appreciate her observations. That was unique. That she got. I think she even had a photo of it on the top of this. I think it was like a 200-foot tower. So yeah, all of you people who turn in our vulture tag marking data, we can't thank you enough. We get so much, and it's so valuable.
Yeah, citizen science is sure great, and we benefit greatly from all of the Condor Cam viewers who have reported their observations to us. It's very much appreciated. We're up against it on time. Many thanks to Pete Bloom for joining us.